Olá, boa noite. O Roda Viva começa agora para todo o Brasil pela TV Cultura e suas emissoras afiliadas. Nós também estamos em transmissão simultânea pelas plataformas digitais e você pode nos acompanhar a partir de qualquer lugar do mundo. Por muito tempo foi um tabu falar em casa, na mídia e mesmo nos meios acadêmicos e científicos sobre o nosso tema central de hoje, a menopausa. Cercada de estigmas, ela deixou de ser estudada devidamente e, com isso, a ciência demorou a entender como o cérebro, e não só os órgãos reprodutivos, desempenham um papel central nesse processo. Este programa é para acabar com esse tabu e já começa com um alerta. Não é um papo para mulheres. É fundamental que vocês, homens, fiquem conosco pela próxima hora e meia para entender o que se passa com as mulheres da sua vida quando elas estão prestes a entrar ou já estão na menopausa. Para essa jornada, nós temos a honra de receber uma das maiores especialistas do mundo em saúde da mulher, fenômeno na internet e autora do best-seller global O Cérebro e a Menopausa, a neurocientista Lisa Mosconi. Lisa Mosconi nasceu em 12 de setembro de 1978 em Florença, na Itália. É professora de neurociência e diretora do Programa de Prevenção de Alzheimer da Universidade de Cornell, em Nova York. Foi listada pelo The Times como uma das 17 cientistas vivas mais influentes e homenageada na lista L100, Mulheres que Estão Mudando o Mundo, como a Mona Lisa da neurociência. É autora de diversos artigos científicos e livros, como o best-seller O Cérebro e a Menopausa, publicado no Brasil pela HarperCollins. Para entrevistar a doutora Lisa Mosconi, a nossa bancada de hoje é composta por Carla Vilhena, jornalista, Tatiana Vasconcelos, jornalista, apresentadora da CBN, Cláudia Lima, editora da newsletter Iabas e roteirista do Saia Justa, Silvia Ruiz, jornalista, e Luciana Garbim, editora executiva e colunista do Estadão. Contamos ainda com os desenhos de Luciano Veronese e tradução simultânea de Áurea Dalbó. Boa noite, doutora Lisa. Muito obrigada por ter aceitado o nosso convite e estar com a gente essa noite.
Thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure and an honor to be here today.
Desde que eu li o seu livro, eu estava sonhando com esse programa justamente para a gente conseguir quebrar alguns dos estigmas ligados à menopausa. E assim, durante muitos anos se associou a terapia de reposição hormonal ao risco de aumento de câncer de mama. E hoje essa leitura vem sendo revista pela ciência. O que exatamente se comprovou de errado naquela interpretação original dos estudos e por que isso levou tanto tempo para ser corrigido?
Oh, this is quite a start to the conversation. So what happened in the late 1990s is that a large clinical trial, the largest clinical trial of women's health in history, was launched, and that is the Women's Health Initiative. The Women's Health Initiative trials were ended quite abruptly in 2002, 2003, because the therapy was not achieving the effects that we were hoping it would achieve, but actually quite the opposite. It was not being as helpful as people were hoping. And there was also an increased risk of breast cancer in one of, of the trial's arms. Not in the other. In the other trial, the risk of breast cancer was actually reduced. But the media really focused on the increased risk of breast cancer in one of the studies, and that led to global panic and women stopping therapy almost overnight, also to a lot of lawsuits against pharmaceutical companies. And that also effectively slowed down research on hormone therapy. What we know today, more than 20 years later, is that the trials were done on postmenopausal women who were in their 70s and 80s when the studies began. And by then, hormone therapy may not be as effective because the window of opportunity may be coming to a close. We do know that hormone therapy is best used as women go through menopause in midlife. The other thing that we have learned very importantly is that formulation matters. Hormone therapy comes in many different shapes and forms and routes. And what we use today clinically are different preparations and different formulations that have led to a reconsideration of risks, especially around breast cancer. And what professional societies today openly state is that the risk of breast cancer for hormone therapy used in midlife using standardized clinical trial evaluated preparations for those women who do select to use hormone therapy, the risk of breast cancer is actually very small. So it's considered a rare occurrence. So that completely changed the way that we think about it.
É isso, ela falou que eu já comecei ali pela notícia mais recente que impactou a vida de muitas mulheres, mas a gente vai voltar ao começo e falar sobre as relações entre o cérebro e a menopausa e tudo mais. Agora a Cláudia, por favor, Cláudia.
Boa noite. Eu queria saber qual que é o papel da privação do sono e das ondas de calor noturnas no comprometimento do cérebro e como que isso afeta a memória e a cognição.
That is also a difficult question to start with. Many women who are going through menopause, whether perimenopausal or postmenopausal, do report sleep disturbances and mood disturbances as well. That is part of the transition for many women. And the reason is that what we consider sex hormones, like estrogen and progesterone, are brain hormones too. And they do play a role in the way that the brain handles sleep and wake cycles, mood, cognition, and also body temperature regulation. So I think it's clear that if a woman cannot sleep well and if hot flashes at night, which we call night sweats, are also disrupting sleep, then in the morning you may not feel in great shape. You may have brain fog, you may have a hard time functioning, your mood may be impacted as well. Now, the solution, I wish I had just one that I could offer easily, but addressing these symptoms is difficult and requires individualized assessments. We do know that hormone therapy for menopause can be prescribed. In our country is off-label, but it can be prescribed to support sleep, especially when hot flashes are disrupting sleep. That can help. And also is indicated for relief of mild depressive symptoms as related to hormonal transitions. That is an opportunity. Lifestyle is also really important. Sleep hygiene is really recommended. Stress reduction is another big one. And just exercise, diet, avoiding toxins. There are many things that a woman can do every day that do support brain health overall and can help ease the symptoms of menopause as well.
Carla.
Me sinto honrada de estar aqui. Eu acho que o famoso TED Talk da doutora Lisa Mosconi foi muito importante para todas nós, porque abriu todo um novo mundo. E no seu livro, O Cérebro e a Menopausa, doutora, você fala do neurosexismo, que por incrível que pareça é bastante recente e que serviu, várias teorias serviram de base para criar e manter esse mito de que o cérebro das mulheres é inferior ao dos homens, embora aqui no Brasil a gente saiba que estatisticamente as mulheres têm muito mais anos de escolaridade, somos maioria nas universidades, e também que as mulheres, muitas, mesmo com todos os sintomas, encaram bravamente o mercado profissional e continuam tendo desempenho semelhante ao dos homens. No entanto, as mulheres são muito vítimas de etarismo, os homens são considerados como tendo assim, o auge das suas faculdades mentais na idade de 55 anos ou mais, enquanto as mulheres não conquistam muitas vezes cargos elevados e são consideradas inferiores ainda hoje. Você diria, doutora, que a menopausa exerce esse papel no preconceito contra as mulheres mais velhas, especificamente no mercado de trabalho?
I would. I would say that, yes. I think the women have been really under fire from multiple perspectives for centuries at this point. We are all aware of ageism and sexism, which then I would say really merge together towards menopauseism, which is very unfortunate. It's really unfortunate in many different ways because, like you said, a man gets older and we think of that as fine wine, right? The older you are, the more precious you become. And for women, for whatever reason, that does not apply, but rather we are thought of as vinegar, right? That at some point we come with an expiration date after which we get sour in some ways, which obviously is nuts. But unfortunately, neurosexism has been part of research and culture in the medical world for a very, very long time. It goes back to Charles Darwin, who is considered the father of modern biology, who was a misogynist, openly so, and started out by saying that women's brains were inherently inferior to men's brains. And that's why neuroscience effectively started out as a discipline that meant to prove him right. Right? So women's brains have always been evaluated and studied as not being as functional as a man's brain, as being not as intellectually capable. And for so long, women were kept out of universities and higher paying positions and C-level positions based on this notion that their brains just could not handle. And it took decades of research and work by many, many scientists to really switch the tables around and change the narrative and the conversation, only to land on menopause, right, which has not been studied that much, to the point that still today menopause remains one of the most under-researched, under-diagnosed, and under-treated and underfunded fields of medicine. And the reason for that is that a lot of brain research has been done on men, and men don't go through menopause. So there's a whole part of the population that's been left out. And even in studies that do include women and men, we tend to just group them together and then statistically remove the effects of sex and gender, which gives us information about a sexless or genderless individual, but doesn't tell us anything about their own physiology. So I think there's a problem with culture in general. There's a problem in the medical framework where it comes to studying brain health that are now changing with more and more women speaking up and showing clearly that we can handle menopause, we can handle aging, we can handle a lot of different things and still perform optimally. And now we also need the research and the medical care that will allow us to really live at our best, not just when we're young, but at every age and walk of life.
Maravilhoso. Silvia?
Eu queria fazer uma pergunta, ainda pegando carona no que a Carla acabou de falar. Quase 2/3 das mulheres nessa fase da perimenopausa experimentam brain fog, uma certa dificuldade de memória. Às vezes a gente acha que está perdendo a cabeça, isso é muito normal, as mulheres se sentem assim. No ambiente de trabalho isso pode ser muito assustador. A gente pensa que, então, nós vamos ser desvalorizadas, né? Vamos dizer, bom, o cérebro da mulher piora nessa fase, mas você já falou que nos testes cognitivos que são realizados entre mulheres e homens nessa mesma idade, as mulheres continuam, mesmo vivendo a perimenopausa, performando melhor do que os homens nos testes cognitivos. Você poderia explicar isso melhor, por favor?
Yes, happily so. I think that's a really important point of conversation because the notion that menopause puts you at a disadvantage is very realistic for women because we may experience symptoms that are very disruptive also for a long amount of time. And like you said, up to 62% of all perimenopausal and postmenopausal women report brain fog, which is more like a colloquial term, but in clinical terms, we refer to that as cognitive fatigue or mental fatigue, which is almost like having a hard time doing things that used to be a no-brainer, right? No pun intended. And that is cause of enormous stress for so many women, in part because that may impact your ability to just function in the house, at work, for yourself. It can be really disruptive, to the point that a lot of our patients actually come to us at first because they are concerned that they may be experiencing early onset dementia. I think it's really important to talk about this because so many women just don't know what hit them. They worry that maybe they're going crazy, maybe they're losing their minds, maybe they are developing dementia, they're just young for that. So it's really important to explain that that can happen because estrogen in particular is a very important hormone for brain health and cognition. It is important for memory, for attention, and for language. So when women are having a hard time remembering things, they're having the forgetfulness or the memory lapses, or so many women will come to us and say, I feel like I'm getting ADHD, attention deficit disorder. I can't function the way I used to. I can't come up with words. I'm having a hard time talking even. And that could be really disruptive. That could be a direct consequence of the change in hormonal concentrations during the transition to menopause and the impact that that has on the brain. Now, what happens when you come to us or to other clinics for an evaluation is this. So let's say that a woman in midlife takes a standardized test for cognition and memory. We use one here, which I'm sure you have in Brazil. It's called the MoCA, formerly the MMSE, Mini Mental State Examination. The scores go from 0 to 30. Most women my age and your age, most women in the menopausal or premenopausal window would score anywhere between 27 and 30. It's very unusual to be below. So you have 27, 28, 29, and 30. If you're at 30 and you wake up in menopause and you're at 28, that is terrifying because it means going from being a top performer to not a top performer, right? And that is terrifying to you. I'm a 30 when I get tested. I would have a really hard time not being able to get again to the 30. You would feel it. But 28 is perfectly normal. And so it's really important to say that for women doing this kind of evaluations, what we have learned is that, yes, for you, that is a big difference. But clinically, you're fine. Most women will still score within the normal range by age and education, which is really important and reassuring to know. And the other point is that when you actually compare men and women in midlife, but also later in life, on cognitive testing, the women before menopause, the women outperform men on most memory tests, especially for verbal memory, which is the memory of things that happen to you, memories that can be communicated, memories of things you've done, you've said, especially. With menopause, what can happen is that the average comes down for women to the same level as a man of the same age who's not going through menopause. And that is almost funny if you think about it. But it's really important to clarify that even with the symptoms, with the disruption, with the not being able to sleep, with the hot flashes, with the brain fog, women are not underperformers. That is very, very important to clarify.
Agora sim, Tati.
Doutora Lisa, boa noite a todos. Você diz no livro que a perimenopausa se assemelha a outros dois momentos da vida de uma mulher. A adolescência, a puberdade, de uma mulher que decide ter filhos. E o puerpério, né, a gravidez. Queria saber como é que os hormônios e o cérebro se comportam nesses períodos, o que há de semelhança entre esses períodos da vida, e aproveitar para falar também sobre a falta de vocabulário, porque você também diz no livro que, apesar dessas semelhanças, adolescentes e gestantes são bem mais bem compreendidos do que mulheres na perimenopausa.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, this is one of my favorite topics of research right now. I like to refer to that as the 3 Ps. So puberty, pregnancy, perimenopause, which is the transition to menopause. I think every woman on the planet needs to know that there are transition states in a woman's life, specifically neuroendocrine transition states, which means that the brain, the neurological system, and hormones, your endocrine system, are changing together at very specific times throughout a woman's lifespan. And what every woman really needs to know is that we are born with the neuroendocrine system that connects the brain to the ovaries and the rest of the reproductive system. We're born with it, but the system is kind of quiet until we hit puberty. At that point, it's activated. And then it stabilizes, it plateaus until we get pregnant. If a woman chooses to get pregnant, then the system is overactivated every time a woman is pregnant. And then shuts down, is turned off, at least in part, with the transition to menopause. Why is that important? Because there are many similarities between the 3 Ps, puberty, pregnancy, and perimenopause. I know that they feel different, but from the brain's perspective, they are not that different. So puberty, what happens is that your brain is growing. And as it's growing, actually, it starts shedding neurons. It gets rid of neurons. In fact, right after puberty, when the transition is complete, the brain will have lost almost 50% of all the neurons and connections, which may sound a little bit scary perhaps, but is actually very smart because neurons are very metabolically expensive. And all the neurons and connection between neurons that the brain needed to get you through puberty, like how do I tie up my shoes, right? How do I brush my teeth? Can I pack my own lunchbox? All these neurons that needed to get you to each step are no longer needed. You can do that on autopilot right now. And so the brain lets them go and rewires itself in ways that really support empathy, compassion, and social cognition, which means the brain is rewiring itself to make sure that you, woman, an individual, can become a member of society, and more important, a parent or a mother, because at that point you become reproductively viable. That is the beginning of your reproductive span. Then let's say that a woman does get pregnant, the neuroendocrine system really ramps up because a lot of the things that need to happen to host the pregnancy actually start in the brain. The neuroendocrine system ramps up and the brain goes through another rewiring that is very important to strengthen the memory centers that are responsible for even understanding other people's feelings just intuitively. Now, both puberty and pregnancy have a really good reason to happen and for the brain to rewire itself, but there are glitches. Puberty, you start sweating. Most kids at that age are sweaty, or they see changes in their sweat glands throughout the body. So there's changes in body temperature regulation. There's change in sleep. Some kids sleep through the afternoon or are up all night. So the sleep and wake patterns change. Mood changes. We all know adolescents are feisty and moody and who knows what. And there's definitely brain fog right? You're like spacey and can kind of have a hard time focusing sometimes. Not everybody, but it can happen.
Sim.
Pregnancy, very similar. 30% of pregnant women have hot flashes. So it's the same system that can create similar symptoms. There's the mommy brain when you're pregnant. There's the brain fog. There's the baby blues. There can be mild depression. There can be postpartum depression. There can be severe depression. Fast forward to menopause, that's the end of your reproductive life. So everything comes to a close. The neuroendocrine system changes once again. The brain rewires itself. All the neurons that you needed to be reproductive can be let go. And the rewiring comes with more glitches because at that point we're also a little bit older, right? So there can be the hot flashes, the night sweats, the insomnia, depression, anxiety, brain fog, memory lapses. Those come back. But in reality, we had a preview, a puberty, and then a pregnancy, and now again, they may take place in menopause. That was a long explanation, but I'm very, very passionate about this.
Longa, mas necessária. Com isso, a gente faz um pequeno intervalo. Roda Viva volta já já com mais entrevista com a Lisa Mosconi. Não sai daí.
Diversidade, equidade e inclusão. Bradesco.
Nós estamos de volta e quem pergunta agora para a neurocientista Lisa Mosconi é a Luciana Garbim.
Oi, doutora Lisa, boa noite. Prazer estar aqui com vocês. Eu queria falar um pouco sobre o peso da genética nos sintomas que a gente vai ter de menopausa, né? A gente vê que algumas mulheres experimentam sintomas super intensos, enquanto outras passam ali de uma forma, às vezes até quase ilesa, né, por esses sintomas. Desde que eu comecei a pesquisar sobre isso e conversar sobre isso, sempre tem alguém que me fala, como é que a sua mãe se sentiu na menopausa? E aí, assim, eu fui conversar com a minha mãe, ela nem lembrava direito, porque naquela época acho que elas nem falavam muito sobre isso. Mas qual que é o peso? Isso faz sentido? Quanto a genética pesa nos sintomas que a gente vai desenvolver da menopausa?
You know, yes, it's a really good strategy to ask your mother, and the fact that she doesn't remember is hopefully a good sign. There is genetic linkage when it comes to menopause, which is an experience that is partially maternally inherited. And the symptoms do tend to cluster together in families. So if your mother had an easy menopause, there's a chance that you may also have an easy menopause, especially the timing becomes quite predictable. For women whose mothers go through menopause early, those women are also more likely to go through menopause around the same age. There are factors that can change the timing, and these are predominantly lifestyle and medical history, and of course, history of medications.
Doutora Lisa, o fato de 2/3 dos diagnósticos de Alzheimer ocorrerem em mulheres tem uma relação direta com a menopausa ou existem outras muitas camadas de explicação? Como diferenciar na prática clínica os lapsos de memória, esse brain fog a que a senhora se referiu, dos primeiros sinais de demência?
Yes, well, that is the core of my research, is Alzheimer's prevention, especially for women. We do know that Alzheimer's disease is a very complex and multifactorial disease where many different things weigh in on the risk for each individual. We have genetics, we have lifestyle, we have medical history, we have environmental influence, and for women, we do have hormonal risks. We and others are studying menopause as a risk influencer for Alzheimer's disease, and we're studying exactly what you just said. We're looking into whether brain fog in midlife and as related to menopause is a kind of stress test on the brain. Is it a sign of memory vulnerability or cognitive vulnerability that can perhaps predict a future risk of Alzheimer's down the line? We do not have the answers yet, but I am happy to report that many scientists are now looking into that with us, and we hope to have answers really soon.
Tatiana?
Eu quero falar sobre a atualização dos protocolos para tratamento hormonal, já que a Vera começou falando sobre o estudo que ficou muito famoso e que gerou um ruído de comunicação muito grande durante anos em relação a isso. Sobre riscos e ganhos, quais são hoje? A gente sabe que a terapia de reposição hormonal ou tratamento hormonal são muito individualizados, né? Mulher a mulher mesmo, apesar das evidências científicas que nos colocam ali numa coletividade. Quais são hoje os indicativos para a terapia hormonal e quais são os sintomas para os quais ainda não há evidências científicas suficientes para se recomendar tratamento hormonal?
So, here in the United States, professional guidelines around use of hormone therapy for menopause are available online. I'm sure it's the same in Brazil. And it's very useful to have this information because any woman can download the guidelines and see whether she fits on the hormone therapy map. Here in the United States, but I think internationally, hormone therapy for menopause is approved for relief of vasomotor symptoms, which are hot flashes and night sweats. And is also used, this is not for the brain, but is also indicated for genital urinary symptoms like recurrent UTI or urinary tract infections, low libido, and vaginal dryness, which is a peripheral indication. As far as the brain is concerned, hormone therapy is also used to address sleep disturbances as related to peri and post-menopause, especially early postmenopausal sleep disturbances and perimenopausal, and for addressing mild depressive symptoms as related to hormonal fluctuations. We do not yet recommend hormone therapy specifically for cognition, except for women who go through menopause early, which is before the age of 47, sometimes 45. So that would be early or premature menopause. For those women, especially those who go through menopause because of an oophorectomy, which is the surgical removal of the ovaries, hormone therapy is not only recommended, but encouraged for hot flashes and night sweats, but also for osteoporosis, for preservation of bone health and to reduce, well, let's say to support mood and cognition and potentially lower the risk of cardiovascular events.
Ou seja, bastante coisa. Carla?
Bom, minha pergunta, doutora, é um complemento à pergunta da Tatiana, porque muitas mulheres foram prejudicadas por esse medo de ter câncer de mama, né, que em decorrência desses anos todos em que nós ficamos aí nesse limbo a respeito da reposição hormonal. E a partir desse novo posicionamento do FDA, essas mulheres pensam que perderam a oportunidade de se proteger contra declínio cognitivo, o que não é certo, a gente sabe que precisa de mais pesquisas, mas essas mulheres suportaram os sintomas da menopausa que poderiam ter sido atenuados. Então, eu gostaria de saber quais são as mulheres que ainda estão nessa janela de aproveitamento da reposição hormonal, a partir de qual idade a reposição não faz mais efeito, segundo as pesquisas existentes, e a necessidade também, que a senhora sempre coloca, de mais e mais pesquisas que têm que ser feitas sobre esse assunto e que, infelizmente, não estão sendo feitas, pelo menos na quantidade que seria necessário.
You know, I feel for them, and Things move slow. I think it's great that things are moving and that menopause is becoming a priority and people are paying attention. That was a long time coming, and I think it's really important that now more physicians will feel comfortable prescribing hormone therapy, because the black box warning is a very serious indication. It's a big deterrent also for clinicians to suggest something that evidently is being marked as harmful to women. So the removal is a very significant step that I think will hopefully also lead to more education among menopause care specialists when it comes to using hormone therapy today. For those women, I will mention a few things. Most importantly, as of 2022, there is no longer a hard stop to initiating hormone therapy. In other words, you don't need to stop hormones just because you are a specific age, let's say 60, 65. And you may also start hormone therapy in your 60s or later, assuming that you do have symptoms that might benefit from using hormone therapy and no contraindications. I will also say that there is now a renaissance to using hormone therapy. It's a very hot topic, but it's not the only tool at our disposal. I think it's really important to say the lifestyle does matter, especially in the brain sciences, in Alzheimer's prevention. All the recommendations we have right now are lifestyle based, and we do know that lifestyle and appropriate medical care and doing all the things that we have formalized, in case you want to go through them, I have a list, that is very supportive of brain health.
E essa lista está no livro da doutora Liza, então recomendo a todo mundo que leia, e homens leiam também. Silvia, por favor.
Doutora Liza, no seu livro você explica como o cérebro, essa transição da menopausa no cérebro é uma espécie de reforma no cérebro, né? A gente se livra de neurônios que não são mais necessários para a reprodução, etc. Há toda uma reformulação, por isso essa confusão toda que a gente passa nesse período, que é normal numa reforma, mas depois a gente sai com esse cérebro com mais capacidade de regulação emocional, com menos preocupações e coisas que nos incomodavam antes, que causavam sentimentos negativos. Então, a gente pode dizer que a gente sai mais feliz e com a capacidade de apertar a tecla dane-se.
You may, for sure. So there's some research done on the brain adaptations that take place in menopause and the psychological impact, if you will. And I think it's important to say that menopause is effectively a renovation project on the brain, where the brain is rewiring itself to support the woman's transition from having a reproductive life to no longer having a reproductive life. But what's key here is that you do not need, as a woman, you do not need to be reproductive to be productive. And their brains remain remarkably efficient after menopause, which I think is really important to underline. And there are studies showing that happiness or life contentment is actually higher after menopause, not universally so, but in the studies that were done on average, life contentment was higher after menopause than before, to the point that many women reported feeling happier than they themselves used to be before menopause. I think these studies were done predominantly in Europe, and I would love to see more research done globally, because evolutionarily speaking, there's got to be an advantage to menopause. Not everybody believes it, but I do. And I think that there has to be an evolutionary advantage also for women, perhaps in many different forms. One advantage that has been studied, like you said, is emotional transcendence, which is an interesting term, indicating that your mood is perhaps, or your reaction to emotions after menopause may be more even where negative emotions do not hold the same charge that they used to prior to menopause. In other words, things that would upset us before menopause become more like, been there, done that, whatever. You don't sweat the small things, but the postmenopausal brain is still just as capable of sustaining happiness. In other words, postmenopausal women tend to be generally more content and less likely to be bothered by negative things that may happen to them within reason.
Olá, meninas, vai chegar esse momento, tem que ter fé. Cláudia.
Doutora, alguns poucos estudos já feitos relataram algumas diferenças nos sintomas da menopausa em mulheres negras e mulheres brancas. Eu queria saber o que você observa na mudança da função cognitiva nas mulheres negras e nas asiáticas, por exemplo, e se existem avanços no que diz respeito aos estudos da menopausa em relação à raça e etnia.
Well, so what we know at this point is that Black and Hispanic women, unfortunately, tend to experience more severe symptoms of menopause, especially hot flashes and night sweats, whereas Asian women do not experience as severe symptoms. In other words, the symptoms can be most severe for Black and Hispanic women. They're somewhere in between for white Caucasian women, and they're not as severe for Asian women. The reason for this is under investigation, and I'm actually pleased to report that we have launched what appears to be the largest ever global research study on women's health, menopause, brain health, and Alzheimer's risk that includes information from women all over the world. So we will hopefully soon be able to provide more information and explain what's happening, why it's happening, how do we tackle that, how do we provide support to all women, not the average woman only.
Luciana.
Doutora, muitos profissionais de saúde relatam pouquíssima formação em menopausa, né? Durante, por exemplo, a faculdade de medicina. E aí a gente vê como consequência muita gente que às vezes vai no médico, muitas mulheres que relatam que foram no médico nessa idade, né, da menopausa, tendo sintomas claramente associados à menopausa e que o médico nem falou, por exemplo, de uma reposição hormonal, nem cogitou fazer algum tipo de tratamento relacionado. Como que a gente pode resolver isso, essa baixa formação no tema nas faculdades de medicina, por exemplo?
Yeah, I think no one in college even hears about menopause, right? I certainly did not. You need to get to a residency program in OB-GYN, obstetrics and gynecology, to just hear about it, at least here in the United States. And then there's an extra step to become a menopause care specialist. Almost, as far as I know, it's about 1 in 5 residents in this country, perhaps not 1 in 4, who do become menopause care specialists. And that could be an issue because when, as a woman, you go to your gynecologist and assume that the gynecologist can guide you pretty much through your life. And this is not necessarily the case. Many gynecologists are really well trained to work with you while you are in your reproductive years, may not be as well equipped to help you through your menopause. So it is important to check if your doctor is licensed as a menopause care specialist, if they are providing care in that specific area. I think now that menopause hormone therapy is becoming much more accessible to so many women, and so many women want to know whether they should use it, whether they could use it, what the benefits and risks are, more and more specialists may decide to also get informed and be able to provide care for menopausal women. I think it's always like a demand, like a supply and demand kind of system that now menopause is having a moment and is getting on people's radars. So hopefully schools will update their curriculums to include menopause care for residency programs and make it mandatory. That would be great. And hopefully very soon we will have more providers who are willing and able to help.
Antes de passar,
you have some great ones in Brazil, by the way.
Eu vi que Silvia e Tati fizeram sinais, mas só para aproveitar essa pergunta da Luciana, acho que é importante a gente falar para o nosso público, né, para quem está nos assistindo, em termos populacionais, da quantidade de gente que a gente está falando que vai invariavelmente passar pela menopausa, e como isso é importante. Portanto, não é um assunto segmentado, é um assunto que atinge mais da metade da população mundial, e com a longevidade aumentando, isso cada vez mais vai ter de ser endereçado, até em termos econômicos. No seu livro tem essa parte que trata dessa demografia. Queria que a senhora explicasse para o nosso público.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the numbers are staggering. It's been estimated that in the next 15, 20 years, more than 1.2 billion women all over the planet will be in menopause or going through the menopause transition. It's an enormous amount of women. I think for context, the population of China is 1.3, 1.4 billion, right? It's a lot of people, and over 80% of women going through menopause report not just reproductive changes, but also neurological symptoms, especially hot flashes and night sweats. But we also know that almost 2/3 or 60% more or less may experience brain fog, which can be very destabilizing. And in comparison, at least here in the United States, only 4% of women in peri and early postmenopause receive hormone therapy, right? So I think there's a population here that is very advanced, that we know what we want, we know what we need. We're not just going to sit quietly in a corner, getting older and being treated as an older person. We are going to demand attention and care. And I really hope that changes the conversation for us and certainly for the new generations. My daughter is 10 and she knows everything about menopause.
É isso. Eu tinha prometido passar a palavra para as meninas, mas eu vou para o intervalo e eu volto com vocês. Não fiquem bravas comigo. É isso, a gente já volta.
Diversidade, equidade e inclusão. Bradesco.
Este programa sobre menopausa com a doutora Lisa Mosconi está de volta. Quem pergunta agora é a Tatiana Vasconcelos.
Eu queria falar sobre libido. A queda da libido é percebida por cerca de 30% das mulheres. E durante muito tempo, como você traz no livro, a menopausa foi associada diretamente à queda do desejo sexual feminino. Aí, com o avanço dos estudos, esse entendimento vai ganhando, felizmente, complexidade. Hoje se entende a queda da libido como multifatorial e não somente relacionada às transformações hormonais na menopausa. Queria te ouvir um pouco sobre o impacto da saúde emocional, por exemplo, na sexualidade, e como é que a ciência entende hoje a variação da libido na menopausa?
Well, this has been looked into for quite a while now, and we do know that women going through menopause tend to experience a reduction in libido. However, the picture is quite nuanced, and there are very interesting studies showing that for many women, actually, that is not the case, especially once you're past the transition. There seems to be a rebound in energy overall, and also renewed interest and more libido afterwards. And it seems to be a very individual response, where for some women who were not as interested perhaps in intimacy or not particularly active in that department, if you will, that may persist throughout the transition. Whereas for women who consider their sexual life as being very important, that remains just as important. And those women are more likely to look for solutions. And actually, that is an indication for hormone therapy, which I mentioned before, is low libido. And many scientists and clinicians are also now looking at testosterone therapy specifically for that indication with generally good results.
Silvia.
Doutora Lisa, nessa fase desafiadora, né, da perimenopausa e menopausa, com ansiedade, sem dormir, com tantos desafios, muitas mulheres recorrem a uma boa dose de bebida alcoólica no final do dia para acalmar, para dormir, uma taça de vinho. Ainda circula muito essa informação entre as pessoas de que uma taça de vinho por dia é um segredo de longevidade que faz bem. Você já me disse uma vez que não toma nenhuma gota de álcool. Queria que você falasse um pouco do papel do álcool no cérebro da mulher na menopausa.
I do not drink any alcohol ever. I never have, actually, which is strange for an Italian. Alcohol is not so good for the brain, alcohol per se, but alcohol in the form of red wine does come with some phytonutrients or important chemicals that are antioxidants and are in small amounts good for brain health. What happens in menopause is that drinking more alcohol is a little bit more like a Band-Aid, right? You are trying to feel better, but that can actually backfire because drinking alcohol through the day is dehydrating, which is not so great for your brain or for you, and also can lead to waking up at night. So it could actually backfire. I'm not trying to discourage anyone from drinking a little bit of alcohol here and there, but just know that it may not be your best ally as you go through menopause. And some women experience more sensitivity to stimulants like alcohol and caffeine, both as they go through the transition. So that's also a very important thing to keep in mind. Find out how your body reacts and whether you may need to cut down a little bit or not. It's very individual, just something to keep in mind. It may actually make the symptoms worse.
Isso, e as ressacas viram Covid, né? Carla, depois Claudinha.
Eu queria voltar na questão da longevidade, porque é bastante interessante a informação no seu livro de que as mulheres podem passar até 30% da vida dentro do período da menopausa. E aí, a partir daí, eu gostaria de chamar a atenção aqui agora para grande parte da nossa audiência feminina que já chegou a uma idade um pouco mais avançada, porque existe um paradoxo que é que na natureza existem muito poucas espécies animais em que as fêmeas sobrevivem à perda da sua capacidade reprodutiva. Então, eu gostaria de ouvir a sua explicação, que eu achei muito interessante, sobre a teoria da avó, porque esse é um conceito evolutivo tão importante para a espécie humana e que possibilita até ao ser humano essa perpetuação da espécie. Gostaria de ouvi-la.
Yes, it's one of my favorite fields of research when it comes to menopause, and it's such an important thing to keep in mind. So we take menopause for granted, and we take longevity and life after menopause for granted. But in reality, very few female animals all over the planet survive menopause or outlive menopause. So in nature, killer whales, which is interesting, narwhals, another type of whale, and potentially some giraffes and a kind of Asian elephant are the only animal species where the females live past the end of the reproductive life for more than just a few years. Even monkeys, which are technically our closest relatives, do not live that long after the end of the reproductive span. So women, in a way, we're very fortunate because we do live another 30% of our lives in the postmenopausal stage. So that really means let's make the most out of it. Now, there are theories in evolutionary biology that this is adaptive, is a good thing for our species to have older women who are no longer reproductive, so they don't need to worry about having babies at an older age, but they're still there to support their own daughter and their stepdaughters, right? Their daughter-in-law, so that their daughter can carry babies and the grandmothers can help them and take care of them. So we switch from being mothers to being caregivers, which is such an important functionality. And some theories that the grandmother hypothesis posits that this is something that really supported humans in their expansion. So women's longevity past menopause and the ability to adjust to the postmenopausal stage without all these hormones that they help otherwise appears to be a benefit to society.
Cláudio.
Doutora, eu queria te ouvir sobre quais seriam os exames ou os biomarcadores essenciais que toda mulher na perimenopausa e na menopausa deveriam considerar, além dos testes hormonais básicos, para avaliar o risco de declínio cognitivo.
Oh, for cognition. Oh, great. Yes, absolutely. I thought you wanted to know hormone testing. Was there? I would do a really good baseline, especially for those who are worried about their cognitive future, for women who do have a family history of Alzheimer's disease or dementia, or for just women who want to take care of themselves. I think a good, solid cognitive baseline is something that really has no downsides. So you go to either a specialized clinics like the one I lead, like it's a memory center, or a neuropsychologist. One day, perhaps GPs, like general practitioners, will have these tools handy. I would do a cognitive baseline evaluation with global cognition, memory, attention, and language. I would also throw in there a brain scan. This is not something we can do right now for a number of reasons, but I think in the future, I would love to see brain imaging, at least a basic brain scan, being part of women's medical checkups starting in midlife, the same way they would do mammograms, they would do colonoscopies, and they would do pap smears tests, because our brains are just as important as the rest of us.
Totalmente. Luciana.
Doutora, eu queria retomar um pouco a questão das empresas, né? A gente vê, outro dia eu estava vendo, por exemplo, um programa no Reino Unido que é das empresas amigas da menopausa, que é um programa de acolhimento para mulheres nessa fase da menopausa. Mas o que a gente vê em geral nas empresas é as mulheres nem dizendo que estão na menopausa para não correrem o risco de serem vistas de uma forma pejorativa, né? Como você enxerga essa questão? Assim, tem exemplos inspiradores que poderiam nos guiar nessa transição? Qual deve ser o papel das empresas nisso?
Well, we start to have support for women who are pregnant, for women who had a baby. In some countries, there's a maternity leave. Here in the United States, we don't even have that. We have temporary disability, for whatever that means. But we also have some support in terms of tampons being provided in bathrooms for women. And now there are many policies being passed around that companies also need to be more flexible for women in menopause, not just in terms of cooling and providing HVAC and conditioning, but also perhaps allowing more flexible times. Like in the morning, maybe you don't start at 8 a.m. sharp. you may be able to start a little later, having more flexible hours, which is important especially when people can't sleep. This is still really just starting, at least here. But in England and Australia, I think they're quite ahead in the game. And I think the more countries start implementing policies for the workforce and the workplace that support menopausal women, and the better we're all going to be, because by pure demographics, midlife women are the fastest growing demographic sector worldwide, right? So we're going to have so many people who are part of the workforce who are women going through menopause, and having a system in place to support them makes a lot of sense, also from a financial perspective.
No mundo que passa por esses retrocessos em termos das políticas para as mulheres que a senhora mencionou, en passant, na sua resposta, esse tipo de necessidade não pode ser lida como um estorvo? A mulher numa empresa é um estorvo, é um custo a mais? Como a gente traduz para quem está nos assistindo, quais são os benefícios de incluir as mulheres com essas particularidades, o que as mulheres trazem de volta em termos de ganho para essas empresas e para as sociedades quando elas são produtivas e quando elas têm as suas necessidades atendidas?
Yeah, I find it so bizarre that we even need to talk about this, right? I mean, I am very pro women in general, but I think that it's undeniable that women are supporting everyone, right? Women are raising children with husbands, with partners. We are part of that. And we are taking care, actually, women are 80% of caregivers in general. Like when your parents are aging, women are taking care of the parents for the vast majority. Women are more consistently put in a position to assist others, and we do that very beautifully and very gracefully and very effectively. I think that is absolutely undeniable. You know, I am not an economist, I'm a scientist, but just from a pure public health perspective and thinking about numbers, if such a huge part of the population is going through similar experiences and having similar challenges, it makes sense to address those challenges, especially because they are modifiable. It's important to realize as a society that just letting people sit through years and years of discomfort and symptoms is not helpful to anyone, right? Women suffer and society suffers with them.
É isso, a gente vai então para mais uma pausa e volta já já com o encerramento desse Roda Viva tão importante não para as mulheres, mas para todos.
Diversidade, equidade e inclusão. Bradesco.
Roda Viva de volta. A pergunta agora é da Silvia Ruiz.
Doutora Lisa, você é uma mulher que está chegando próximo aos 50 anos, uma mulher de meia idade. Eu gostaria de saber se você já está experimentando sintomas da perimenopausa também, e se está, o que está fazendo a respeito, e se não está, o que pretende fazer a respeito quando esses sintomas chegarem.
I am so prepared. I have changed a little bit of my routine. My husband thinks I'm a little crazy, but I am very disciplined, and everything that's in the book, I do. From things I don't do, like I don't eat any processed foods. I don't drink alcohol. I switched to decaf coffee, which, you know, I'm Italian, that's hard to do, but I've done it. I exercise every day. I started strength training more than cardio, even though I love cardio. I'm eating more protein than before because many studies show that things like fish and legumes may have a positive impact on menopause. I take all my antioxidants. I just do so many things. I have no plastic anywhere in my kitchen, for instance, which was lovely because I don't like plastic very much. And I'm fortunately, knocking on wood, I am in good health, but if I weren't, this is the time that I would be addressing any medical comorbidities that may have a negative impact on brain health and hormonal health. For instance, metabolic disorders, insulin resistance, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. This is a great time to make sure that there is a plan in place. Hormone therapy is very much on my mind, and I am certainly considering it. I'm not taking it. I don't have any reason to take it right now. I have a regular cycle, if it makes sense to show on national television, but it is very much on my mind. I am doing a lot of research on menopause and brain health and hormone therapy for menopause, specifically because I want to have answers for myself, for my family, for all women in the world, and I want them fast. So I'm working even more than before. And stress reduction. Stress reduction is really important, especially in midlife.
Doutora, o aumento de peso é uma das maiores reclamações das mulheres que estão na menopausa. Eu queria saber o que você acha do uso das canetas emagrecedoras que estão num boom no mundo inteiro. Quais os benefícios e os cuidados que devem ser tomados e se elas podem ser utilizadas durante a menopausa?
They can be used. I'm assuming we're talking about GLP-1 inhibitors, and they are really indicated for women with diabetes and with issues as related to obesity. Very little research has been done about using those medications for normal weight women. And yes, I appreciate that even just a few pounds over your desired weight could be unpleasant and could be a factor. It is normal to gain a little bit of weight as we get older. That is a physiological reaction. It's one way that your body is switching from making estrogen in the ovaries to making estrogen using body fat. So that little cushion is actually the body's way to maintain estrogen supply by just switching location. So I think lifestyle adjustments, more exercise, a healthier diet, better sleep, less stress, those are all factors that do impact weight gain, more so starting in midlife. And it is important to look into that. I would say, just in general, first try the diet and exercise. And yes, it takes discipline. Yes, it takes commitment. But that's good for you overall. And really the benefits are for life, especially that becomes part of your lifestyle. Whereas those medications are more like a quick fix. And there's a risk of putting the weight back on once you stop using them. So yes, it's appealing. Certainly it's desirable to get something that works really quick, but let's think about a healthy lifestyle and accepting certain things and just,
Tati.
Eu quero falar mais de alimentação. A gente vive tempos de volta de exaltação da extrema magreza, né? Mulheres célebres, formadoras de opinião, artistas no mundo inteiro voltaram a exibir os seus corpos esquálidos como se aquele fosse o padrão do que é bonito. E esse padrão é mantido, não raramente, com muita restrição de alimentação. Você dedica um capítulo inteiro à alimentação saudável no seu livro, à nutrição, na verdade, na menopausa. Eu queria entender melhor qual é a importância da alimentação para a saúde do cérebro e exatamente o que significa se alimentar bem, né? Quando a gente fala tem que se alimentar bem, O que isso significa nessa fase da vida, nesses tempos, inclusive em que a menopausa foi capturada pelo mercado, está na moda, o que não faltam são dietas sendo vendidas aí com a menopausa como isca?
Yeah, there is a market for menopause right now, but I think the time-tested diets are always the best. Diets that have survived for decades, if not longer, and that have been tested also in clinical trials. So what we know about nutrition is that food is not just food, but food is information. And your brain needs some of the nutrients that come from the foods that we eat for a number of functionalities that are important for brain health, from energy production to synthesis of neurotransmitters, which are the chemicals that the brain uses to communicate between brain cells. Oxygen supply is really important. Water is really important for brain health. Many nutrients are anti-inflammatory, they're antioxidant in nature, so they do help protect the brain from harm. So diet is a very important tool that we have in the brain health arsenal. And every day we all have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, sometimes even snacks, when we can make a healthy, good choice to support the health of our brains or not. And there's also evidence that food has an impact on hormonal production and hormonal supply to the brain and back. So foods that are helpful, especially to women, are mainly fruits and vegetables, whole grains and complex carbohydrates, fish, nuts, and seeds, which are good sources of omega-3 fatty acids, is the only type of fat that the brain really wants and needs on a daily basis, and lean protein. I would say these are the most important features of a healthy diet for menopausal women. Whole foods, stay away from processed foods, fast food, junk food, packaged food, candy, refined sugar, refined grains, all the kind of stuff really is not helpful to anyone, whereas a whole food-based diet is a really good foundation to start with and has been shown to be helpful to women's health across countries, across continents, and for many, many years.
Luciana?
Doutora, eu queria trazer um pouco isso tudo que a gente está discutindo para a saúde pública, né? Você diz sempre que o tratamento da menopausa precisa ser, né, multidisciplinar. Mas como proporcionar isso na saúde pública, né? Em que às vezes você tem dificuldade até de marcar uma consulta ali, imagina com um médico já é difícil, imagina às vezes com vários, né? Quais estratégias a gente tem que desenvolver para poder ser mais efetivo no acolhimento das mulheres também na saúde pública?
Yes, it's a really good point. See, the problem with Western medicine is that we're really good at fixing things that are broken or intervening when there is an acute issue, like an infection. We're great at that. The downside is the framework where every organ has a doctor, right? So I think for women going through menopause, the issue is not one organ. Yes, the ovaries are going through menopause and the rest of your body and brain with them, but the symptoms that women experience and other systemic changes that can take place in menopause have nothing to do with the ovaries, right? So your gynecologist may not be able to advise you on brain health or on metabolic health or on diet or exercise. What we need, I believe, is an integrative approach to women's health, not just in menopause, but in general, because puberty, menstruation, pregnancy, those are events that are so transformative for women, and we do not necessarily have one professional figure to go to. So I think integrative medicine is the future for women's health. Many clinics, many places are starting to do that. At Weill Cornell Medicine in New York, where I work, we do triage we are in neurology, but we also collaborate with psychiatry. We collaborate with, obviously, gynecologists in the menopause clinic. We work with endocrinology. We work with the metabolic specialists. And we also work with lifestyle medicine. So I think this kind of approach will become more and more available with time.
Carla, para encerrar o programa.
Já que nós estamos no finalzinho, eu queria deixar aí a nossa audiência com alguma notícia boa e eu gostaria de contar, então, agora com a doutora Lisa, para falar para a gente, porque nós já tivemos ano passado uma notícia boa, né, um medicamento que já foi aprovado nos Estados Unidos para o tratamento das ondas de calor e também no seu capítulo do livro Terapia de Reposição com Estrogênio, você fala de uma nova geração de estrogênios que são os Designer Estrogens, chamados de SERM, que é uma sigla para moduladores seletivos do receptor estrogênico. Gostaria de saber por que esse produto pode ser tão revolucionário, né? E como essa descoberta pode beneficiar a saúde mental, a saúde cerebral, mais exatamente, das mulheres na menopausa.
Thank you for asking. So hormone therapy, as I mentioned, is one tool that we have to support women going through menopause. It does come with contraindications. So many women cannot take hormone therapy for menopause. So it's really important to have alternatives. Some alternatives come in the form of non-hormonal medications for hot flashes, like fezolinetant is the medication you've been thinking about. And now we have one more that was just approved here in the United States. So those are two non-hormonal therapies that significantly reduce hot flashes that have nothing to do with hormones. Therefore, there are no concerns around anything else. So that's really good news for all women who are not eligible for menopause hormone therapy. Scientists are also looking into other options, and a very attractive option is the SERMs, selective estrogen receptor modulators. What these molecules do that is so unique is that they can be engineered to work in one organ but not another. And Dr. Roberta Diaz-Brinton, who's a colleague of mine, she's developed a SERM, a selective estrogen receptor modulator for the brain. So what this molecule does is that you take it by mouth, it's just a little pill, but it goes straight up inside your brain and does not touch your reproductive organs. If it does go in the reproductive organ, it has an inhibitory effect versus cellular proliferation, which means it does not increase the risk of reproductive cancers. So you don't even need to take a progesterone if you don't want to. But what these SERMs are doing is that they go up in the brain and they support energy and cellular function in the brain. And we're now doing a clinical trial together with Dr. Brinton, where we are even testing the SERM, the NeuroSERM, for Alzheimer's prevention in women.
Ótima notícia, então, para todas nós. Agradeço por ela, pelo programa todo, pelo seu livro e pelos insights. Muito obrigada.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to be here. And thank you all for your support. So appreciate it.
É isso. Ficamos por aqui. Agradeço também aos colegas, às colegas de bancada e ao Luciano Veronese por essa importante conversa. Estiveram comigo Carla Vilhena, Cláudia Lima, Luciana Garbim, Silvia Ruiz, Tatiana Vasconcelos, Áurea Dabó e ele, Luciano Veronese. Obrigada a vocês pela audiência e pela atenção nos mais diferentes assuntos. Nós vivemos num mundo uma série de retrocessos no que diz respeito aos direitos das mulheres. É importante que a ciência derrube um a um os mitos relacionados à saúde feminina, para que também neste campo o sexismo não volte a imperar. Da nossa parte, como sociedade, cabe produzir e consumir informação de qualidade para romper esse ciclo de desconhecimento a respeito de coisas básicas, como a menopausa, da qual nós tratamos hoje. Você fica agora com o Metrópolis e o Roda Viva volta na próxima segunda-feira, como sempre às 10 da noite, com um assunto para fazer o cérebro funcionar. Eu espero você. Até lá.
Diversidade, equidade e inclusão. Bradesco.